Hi everyone, welcome to Creative Writing. I am Professor Hall, and today we are talking about reading as a writer. There are a couple of reasons I wanted to start the course this way, but basically I think that you can learn a lot from reading other people's work, and we're going to go through some of the things that you can learn and some things to look for. So let's start out with this quote from Stephen King. This is from his book called On Writing, and if you're in my class, you will be reading an excerpt from that book this week. If you're not in my class, I highly recommend getting the book. It's great. So here's what he says. I'm a slow reader, but I usually get through 70 or 80 books a year, mostly fiction. I don't read in order to study the craft. I read because I like to read. It's what I do at night, kicked back in my blue chair. Similarly, I don't read fiction to study the art of fiction, but simply because I like stories. Yet, there is a learning process going on. Every book you pick up has its own lesson or lessons, and quite often, the bad books have more to teach than the good ones. So I really love what he has to say here because he's showing that first, if you want to write, you really should enjoy reading. You should enjoy stories and storytelling, and read first to enjoy and to get lost in those stories. But the second reason that you can read is to look for those lessons, and especially if you're new to creative writing or you're an aspiring creative writer, you can think about things that the author is doing that you want to emulate, things that the author is doing that maybe you want to throw in the trash and never do yourself. All of those techniques that they're using that you can be inspired by, whether that's to kind of steal some techniques and use them in your own work, or whether it's to get rid of those techniques and make sure that you avoid them. So basically what I'm saying is that as we're going through week by week, we're going to be looking at the elements of fiction, characterization, dialogue, conflict, plot, and you have to understand these terms, which hopefully you've gotten before, before you can analyze and evaluate other people's work. And as you're doing that, then you're moving up to be able to create your own stories. So if you have ever heard of Bloom's taxonomy of learning, if you haven't, you can look it up. If you're in my class, you'll get a picture of it this week. But yeah, remembering the terms and understanding them kind of at the bottom of this learning pyramid, analyzing and evaluating in other people's work, which is something we're going to be doing in class. We're going to be doing some peer review and giving each other feedback and seeing how other people use the prompts each week. And eventually moving to the top of the pyramid where you create your own stories. And that is when hopefully you can have some mastery of those techniques. So there are 7 things I'm going to talk about today. What makes a story good or bad? And I'll run through them now and then we'll go through one by one. So, personal preference, subject matter, plot, characterization, narration and point of view, style, and dialogue. There are a few other things, but I just wanted to focus just on those 7 today. And really, the first one, personal preference, that just comes down to opinion. It could be that you really relate to the subject matter. It could be that you just like certain types of stories. If you're a sci-fi nerd like me, if you love romances and you hate stories that are darker, if you really like mysteries, but only certain types. I know some people who really only read cozy mysteries, which are mysteries that are a little bit lighter on the bloodshed and usually feature people in a small quirky town and an amateur detective. And I know other people who hate those kind of stories and they want like dark, gritty, realistic murders, that kind of thing. So sometimes it's just personal preference. The stories I'm giving you this week, a lot of people like, there are two really classic short stories that are found in a lot of anthologies. A lot of people love these short stories. And other people, we won't say who, don't care for them that much. And it's just personal preference. They're very well written. They just, for me, I don't know if they connect as much. There's another story that I'm giving you where it has a really experimental style. And the reviews on that story are very split. Some people love the experimental style and some people find it very confusing and they wish it was just a little bit more straightforward. So that's personal preference. Let's talk about problems with subject matter. Is it something that's tired and done to death? If I read one more young adult book with a love triangle, I am going to go insane. It has been done to death. There is always a girl who is stuck between two boys. One represents her past and doing the right thing. One represents her future and going her own path. She inevitably picks the person who represents the future and going your own way and breaking free from tradition. Just stop. I can't take it anymore. It's too much. Been tired. It's tired and it's done to death. Other times, if you can take something, a really good example is zombies. There's a lot of zombie stories. The Girl with the Gifts, Girl with All the Gifts, is a story about a world in which some zombie children have been able to be tamed, and there is a group of government officials, the remnant of the non-zombies, who are trying to tame and train and teach these zombified children and figure out why they're different. That's a great take on something that is kind of a tired trope, right? So you can take something that's been kind of done to death and try to do it in a different way. Or if you're reading, you can look for things that take something that you think is overdone, but has a new spin on it. Are there tropes and stereotypes? This is sometimes a problem with characterization too. I'm going to read you this excerpt. Here we go. I pulled the window shade and rolled it up. Swoosh! It flapped out of its roll. I was staring at a woman with two most beautifully tipped breasts the world has ever known. They measured full 3.5 milliboobs per handful. What? She was powdering them with a big pink puff, and the shade snapped free. I just stood there stupidly. What else could I do? I have read some really poorly written descriptions of women, and this is one of them. Are there stereotypes having to do with race, with gender? Tropes are things that we see over and over again. So a sitcom where they suddenly have another kid. That's a commonly seen trope. Again, are they using those stereotypes as a jumping off point then to kind of dig deeper? The Hate U Give is a really good example. The words on the book spell out thug, and it's talking about the stereotype and then the real people dealing with these issues. So I guess if you have something like that's done in a really powerful way, that's amazing writing, right? But yeah, be wary of that in your own work. Are you doing stereotyping? Are you doing things that have been done before that people have seen? Is it too similar to the inspiration? Sometimes I see this a lot with younger writers, newer writers, no matter what your age might be. I mentioned the thing about the love triangle. If you're trying to write the next Harry Potter, but it's more like fan fiction, right? Your inspiration can be a great jumping off point. One of the books that I published was a very similar story to in the beginning, in the first chapter. The premise of the story is that a young girl is kidnapped. Because I read a book about a young girl being kidnapped that was really horribly written and had the worst ending, one of the worst endings I ever read. And I just thought, oh, what if it went this way instead? And what if this happened? And what if this happened? And while I was kind of thinking of those things, this book kind of came up. So, yeah, I hope it's better. Anyway, is there a forced message or lesson within that subject matter? You don't want your work to be too didactic. Didactic means that you're teaching and preaching and that kind of thing. So you want to stay away from forced messages and lessons, and see if you, when you're reading, if those things come up, do they annoy you? How could they be done a little bit differently? Problems with plot. The first is that there is a plot hole. This is sometimes an issue in longer works, that there's a character that just was kind of left hanging, that somebody was trapped in place A, and then suddenly they got to place B, and we're not sure how they got out of place A. Plot holes can really disrupt your story. So look to see when you're reading, does something have a plot hole, or does it have a plot where, man, they just had a conversation. We could take care of all this misunderstanding. I read a book one time, and I do not remember the name, but I read a book one time where the premise, it was a romance novel, and the premise was that this man was unsure about whether he should date this woman because she had a child, and he was very religious and trying to live kind of a different type of life. And the child that the woman had was her sister's child. Her sister had died, and she had adopted this child. And first of all, doesn't matter. But secondly, if at any point in this 400-page book, she had just said, this is my sister's child, my sister died, and I adopted her daughter, there would have been no tension at all. And so this person built this book upon this misunderstanding that really, in an adult relationship, you would have that conversation. I never thought I would be a parent this young in life, but my sister passed away and now I'm raising her daughter. That's a normal conversation to have in that kind of a thing. So yeah, if there's a conversation that can happen and it doesn't, that's a problem with plot. Lack of tension and conflict. We're going to talk a lot about conflict in a few weeks. Is there really just no tension at all? So here's a little excerpt, a rewriting of Little Red Riding Hood. Little Red Riding Hood took the basket of cookies to her grandmother's house. On the way, she met a wolf. "Where are you going, my dear?" the wolf asked. "I don't talk to strangers," Little Red Riding Hood replied. She walked away, ignoring the wolf's howls. When she arrived at her grandmother's house, she said, "Grandma, call the police. A wolf tried to follow me." They did, and he was arrested. The end. Now, it's kind of a funny retelling of Little Red Riding Hood, but the idea here is that we have a tiny bit of tension on the way she met a wolf, and then immediately it's just driven away. And sometimes plots can be like this, that the author sets up some tension and it doesn't really pan out. The books, the Twilight books are, I think, a good example of this. They rewrote the last book for the film because the two sides are building up to have this war, and then they have this conversation, oh, you didn't do what we thought you did, and then they don't have any, that's it. There's no battle. There's nothing. And then they just go away and everybody lives presumably their best lives. So in the movie, they have the battle as a vision that someone has. So at least you get that battle experience, right? There is some tension and conflict between the two sides. Poor pacing with plot. If you're reading something, does it move along? Does it keep your attention? Or does it really slow down in the middle and you're just like, I can't finish this story, or I can't finish this book? What issues could there be with characterization? Stereotypes we kind of talked about already. Sometimes characters are just not that interesting. Sometimes they're inconsistent. I there's there's this TV show where there were two people dating. They built up the whole first season. It was for teens, and they built up the whole first season to them kissing. The beginning of the second season, he's cheating on her by sleeping with somebody else. It was totally an inconsistent decision with that character. Based on everything from season 1, he would never have done that in season 2. And this is a good example too, because you can watch TV and movies, especially long form TV, great storytelling going on there. So see how long form, meaning there's 10 episodes that tell one story, right? Long story arcs that go over 1 or 2 seasons. How do they tell their stories? That's always a good question. How do they plot things? How do they, what are the characters like? Another problem with characterization, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more when we get to characterization, is having too many characters in your story or not having enough characters in your story. I had a book submitted to me as a publisher that had 3 characters in the first 5 chapters is what this person submitted to me, or the first 10 pages, sorry. And like in that 10 pages were like 20 characters. And I could not, I'm like, I don't know who is supposed to be your protagonist, who's your hero, who's your villain, where is this story going? There are too many people just kind of crammed in here. And really, yeah, so sometimes you can have too many people, too many things going on. Now, if you're writing an epic saga, something like Game of Thrones, and you have many books to tell your story, and you're adding characters and killing your characters off and things like that, then it's kind of okay. But to have so many in just the first few pages can be a little bit too confusing. So, want to avoid that. Problems with narration. Is the narration consistent? Sometimes with new writers, they switch back and forth between like first person and third person without a reason, and it becomes really confusing how the story is being told. So that's something that I'd like you to kind of look for. Is it a flawed point of view? Meaning, do you have some stereotypes coming up maybe because your point of view is a little off and it's giving you things that you don't really want in there? Is the point of view interesting? Is it the right one for your story? If you have a very personal story and you're telling it from third person instead of first person, sometimes your choice of point of view is just going to be style and personal preference. There are some people who really like writing in first person. There are some people who prefer third person. But yeah, when you're reading a book and the point of view is maybe a mystery where they're having a limited point of view so that the reader can discover some clues as they go, that's interesting. Or as another book that was submitted to me, do you have maybe too many clues and it's an omniscient third person point of view, and you can tell who did it from page 5? That's a problem with a point of view. So so consider that, and consider why they've chosen the thing that they've chosen when you're reading. Why have they chosen first person? Why have they chosen third? Have they chosen second? I'm going to be giving you guys an excerpt 1 week where someone chose to write in second point of view, which uses you and your. It's a very interesting choice. It doesn't usually work. Yeah, is the point of view interesting, and does it work? For instance, could you tell the story of Cinderella from the point of view of the mice? That would be a different character, right? Instead of the typical like third person fairy tale, or even from Cinderella's own point of view. Or do we get to see the prince's side of the story and how he has to throw this stupid ball that he probably doesn't want to throw. And maybe he's not ready to get married, and his parents want him to. Or maybe he's been wanting to get married for quite a long time and has somebody picked out, and now he has to throw this ball. Those are some interesting twists on point of view. Style is a little bit more slippery. We're going to talk about showing versus telling, and what that means, and how to use that technique. Sometimes you just need to tell your reader something, but usually you want to show them and let them come to their own conclusions about things. Sometimes if something is a little bit stilted or it has too flowery language, is there too much imagery? Is there not enough? Are there problems with grammar and syntax? And it's just, you're reading something, there's a lot of errors in there. This is an excerpt, real short excerpt of I looked up worst fan fiction ever, and this is what I found. The vampires turned into much bats. Oh no, Edward say, I am a bat now. The bats made a fly in the sky. Good thing it's nighttime, say Edward, because vampires can no do the sunlight. Suddenly, sunlight! The sun shine in the sky. All bats turn to dust. Oh no, Isabella say, my vampire is much dust. Isabella look at the dust. She put her hand in the dust. Suddenly she turned to dust, because you can no touch the dust. Suddenly wind. The wind blew the dust away. Goodness gracious. There is a story in here. There is a plot, and there is some tension, actually. But the style is so problematic. It's suddenly this and suddenly that, and then this happens, and you can't touch the dust, and obviously the problems with the grammar and syntax are there too. It's likely written by someone quite young, likely written by someone who maybe doesn't speak English, and so I don't want to, make fun of people for that, but I like the suddenly sunlight, suddenly wind, suddenly dust. That kind of repetition, it's a little bit funny. But it is also a good example of telling. I'm telling you, she put her hand in the dust. She turns to dust because you cannot touch it. If you had a scene where maybe there's some magical dust someone wasn't supposed to touch, and they touch the dust, and then their hand starts to disappear, and they start to become the dust, and they now are in a pile, and their clothes are in a heap on the ground, that would be showing the reader that you can't touch the dust, and it would be pretty apparent that the dust is something that should not be touched. Some other issues with style: repetitive sentence structures, and that doesn't, sometimes it's words that are repeated too many times. The first draft of my first book was a novel that was a teenage girl's diary, and I used the word just 256 times. As I was editing it, I was like, why does she keep saying just? And I did Control F to find it. The book was like 260 pages long, so it occurred almost one time on every single page. But repetitive sentence structures, here's just a brief example. John was nervous. He wanted to ask Mary out. They had been friends for a long time. She dated his best friend. They were going out for 2 years. They had been broken up for a year. John hoped Mary would go out with him. You can tell, like, the rhythm, it's almost the same amount of words in each sentence, and it becomes a little bit dull. So there are some things like that that you can kind of look for as you're reading. Problems with dialogue. Inconsistent characterization, things that a character would not say. Is it stilted? Hello, I am fine today. How are you doing? I am doing quite well. There's nothing there to move along the plot. They're people that's not really how we talk, right? When you're talking to someone, it's, you might be, hey, what's up? Everyone sounds the same. This is a little bit trickier, and if you're reading, it's something to look for. Do your characters sound different? Do you have a teenager who sounds like a teenager, and their parent who sounds like a parent, and their little kid sister who sounds like a little kid, right? Or does everyone sound like a snarky teenager? Is there action in your dialogue? This is something we'll talk about a little bit more when we get into dialogue. Having some, she said, taking a sip from her water bottle. That's an action, and it's put in there. It's not a very large action, but it shows you what the people are doing. He continued while he paced around the room. It gives you a little bit of a picture of what these characters are doing while they're talking. So look for how writers use that. How do they use action? The speech tags. Hello, John started. Hello, Mary replied. How are you doing today? John hedged. Sometimes said is just good enough. Sometimes you don't need the speech tags at all if you have a lot of dialogue between like two people. You can just use one once in a while to remind people who's talking. Does it deepen the characterization? Does it contribute to the conflict? Does it further the plot? These are things to look for while you're reading the dialogue. So, those are some things that I would like you to look for this week. And in the next video, we're going to talk about your readings and some positives and some negatives and how you can learn from them as you start your writing journey, how you can learn from them as a reader. But to briefly recap, as you're reading, first and foremost, just enjoy the story and get lost with the characters and dip into the setting, which I didn't talk about here, but dip into the setting and into that world. But also while you're reading, especially for this class, try to think about whether or not you think the story is good or whether it's not so great. Is it just something that you just don't like based on personal preference? Or are there other reasons there? Are there issues with subject matter? Does it have a great plot and really interesting characters? Or is the plot a little bit slow and the characters kind of dull and flat? Does it have a consistent narration and point of view? Do you think that the author picked the right point of view for the story they were telling? Does the style capture your attention? Or do you think that it's a little bit confusing because of the style the author used? Does the dialogue ring true? And in terms of the setting, does it have those details that make it seem real? So these are all the things to look for this week, and I will see you in the next video where we talk about our readings. Thanks, everyone.